So, you guys, we live in a world where money is intertwined with almost every aspect of our lives, yet it's one of the topics that we shy away from the most. But why is that? Why is that we can chat about the weather or our favorite TV shows with ease? We can agree personal finance should be taught to our kids, but when it comes to our finances, suddenly there's awkward silence. Now, today we're going to be exploring the reasons behind this taboo. From cultural norms to personal insecurities, we'll uncover what is keeping you from having open and honest conversations about money. Because when we understand the why, we can start to change the conversation, the relationship with money. Stay tuned. Hey guys, welcome to today's show. I am Brad Nelson, founder of Debt Free Dad. I've paid off about $45,000 of debt outside of my mortgage, and I have been debt-free now for more than 11 years. I've helped thousands of other people save and pay off tens of millions of dollars also with the work that we do here at Debt Free Dad.
And I'm Amber, and I've saved and paid off over $54,000 in 20 months. And we are now living debt-free outside of our mortgage since 2018.
And I am Chris Hawkins, and my wife and I started our journey back in 2005. And from 2005 to 2008, we paid off just under $100,000 in debt and have been debt-free except for our house ever since.
And my name is Ryan, and my wife and I paid off $160,000 in debt over 8 years and are debt-free outside our mortgage.
So after listening to this episode, you guys, if you want to take your finances a step further and you'd like to get better results with saving money and getting out of debt in as little as 30 to 60 days, we're going to be sharing some information and some details about how you can get started on that later on in today's show. So guys, we're talking all about the subject of money. And I think, I can say firsthand, this is why we kind of started this podcast, is to start opening up the conversations about money, because I think we all can agree money is something that a lot of us tend to shy away from. In fact, there is an article from empower.com that we are going to share some pretty eye-opening statistics with you guys on today's episode. And one of the first ones is, money is the monster under the bed in many homes, and it's time to turn on the lights, it says. It says more than half of Americans surveyed say they never talked about finances growing up, 52%. And 1 in 4 learned that it's not polite to talk about money at all. Another 35% of Americans say that they were taught to never ask someone how much money that they actually make. I can remember my parents telling us that too. Like, that's a big no-no. And respondents actually report being raised without practical, critical money lessons like budgeting, 32%, saving for retirement, 21%, negotiating a salary, 18%, or even going on to things like investing, which is 17%. So off the bat, guys, like, what do you guys feel, or what is your reaction to some of these statistics? But why do you guys feel, and even today, do you guys feel like this is still a hard topic for you guys to talk about, more so with, say, people who don't know what the hell that is that we do? Like, you meet somebody out and they're like, well, what do you do for a living? Like, there are times where it's like a little weird. Like, well, I help people get out of debt. And it's like, oh boy, here we go. Like, conversation's either going to be a long one, or for most of them, it's like, oh, okay. And then they do like the hand thing and they walk away. So how do you guys go throughout your days talking about money? Is that a normal thing for you now that you've gone on this journey, or how are your feelings on that?
When I talk to other people, it's so taboo that oftentimes I don't even broach the subject, because I don't want to feel like I'm encroaching in their like private money issues or whatever. Like, I don't want to be that person. So as much as I talk about it on the podcast and I talk about it with anybody who's open and willing to talk about it with me, I still think it's super taboo. And when I was growing up, we were broke. That was our money talk. That was it.
Growing up, I don't remember having any like real financial discussion, like real good financial talk from my parents. I remember a lot of my mom saying that you'll always have a credit card. And I remember like her showing us, how to balance a checkbook. You still had to do that kind of stuff back then. But not really like, here, this is why you should do this. Here's how you save for these things. Here's why you don't go into debt. It was more of, I don't want to say they encouraged it, but I think that's how they paid for their life, by being in, maybe not as much in debt as what I ended up being in, but it definitely was just more of like, you'll always have a credit card. as soon as you pay it off, there'll something come up and you'll have a credit. So you'll always have a credit card. So the second I turned 18, I was like, getting a credit card because I'm always going to have one.
Obviously, I'm very, very comfortable talking about money. I was a financial coach, Brad, you knew this, for several years. Taught high school students for well over 10 years. So I'm not afraid to talk about money. Unfortunately, some people aren't willing to listen. I think that's the bigger question. But
You're not wrong.
In terms of the home, I didn't get any formal education on finance, but I got an education on finance. When you see your parents arguing about money all the time, or you see your parents arguing about spending money, or you see your parents calling your grandparents asking to borrow money, when you see your parents doing home equity loans not once but twice to pay off credit cards and debt, when your parents tell you that you can't go on vacation because they can't afford it, that in itself is an education. Now, I went out as an adult and sort of started doing those same things because I didn't know how to not be that. Now, fortunately for me, and I've never really talked about this, but it just sort of came to me while Ryan was talking. I'm fortunate that when I got married, my father-in-law was born and raised in Scotland. Talk about thrifty people. Talk about somebody who hated debt, who believed in saving and investing. And I watched how he managed his money and listened to how he talked about money. And it's sort of my own version of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, right? With my dad being the poor dad and my father-in-law being the one who had a clue on how to manage money, and despite the fact that he grew up much more poor than my dad did. And so that was sort of the catalyst for me to go, man, I got to get my act together. But still didn't know how. And so I would say that there are conversations that happen in the household that kids are listening to. Why not admit things aren't good and start having those conversations with your kids in an open and honest forum so that they understand where it's coming from and why it's the way it is, because they're listening. And so at least control the narrative and use it as an opportunity to teach your kids, we haven't always been the greatest about how we manage money. And if you're listening to this, hopefully you're listening to it because you want to improve and you want to change things. And there's a roadmap that Brad's got for you. And as you go through that journey, because that's what we did with our kids, we explained to them what we were doing and why we were doing it. And I think now they look back on it and they understand exactly why we did what we did. And I always encourage my students. In fact, I made it a requirement. Keep in mind, I taught in a private school, so I could do things like this, where students once a month had to sit down with their parents and do a budget with their parents' income. I didn't like giving fake scenarios. I didn't like giving what students would call busy work. Some fake family on a piece of paper is just let me get this assignment done. But when you're at home talking with your parents about real money and real situations, now it becomes real. Talk about a real education. So I would say, in terms of, yes, it's taboo to talk about money at home, but if you're listening to this, embrace it. And I encourage you to give it a try.
Now, Chris, do the statistics coincide with what you taught and how to go home with their parents and do their parents' income? Did you have, kickback?
So there was certainly pushback, but I think there was only one instance where a parent said, I'm just not going to do this. Now remember, this is a course that's a graduation requirement. And these, what I call them at-home assignments, where they did work with their parents, was 20% of their grade. So I talked to the parent, and this happened to be a situation where it was very unique and weird. The parents made so much money, they didn't want their kids to know how much money they made, because they were afraid if their kids knew how much money they made, they were like, why aren't we getting more? But part of the reason why they made good money and had money was because they managed it very well. And so we did a compromise where this was the mom, they were going to put X amount of dollars in a separate checking account and have their daughter pay the bills out of that and treat the money they were putting in the checking account as if it were their income, if that sort of makes sense. But yes, there were pushback. There were people who I don't know how this is going to work, but by the end of the semester, 90% of the time they told me, thank you for making us do this. Because my kid would come home and have a conversation about a subject that they wouldn't any other time. Because my kids did the same thing. I'm sure Ryan, Amber, your kids did the same thing. And Brad, you're probably putting up with this now. They come home and you go, what'd you learn today? Nothing. Well, what am I sending you to school for if you're learning nothing? You know they're learning something. There's discussions, there's assignments and lessons that are going on. And so the parents were grateful about the fact that their kid would actually come home and talk about one class.
That's cool.
One class. And so by the end of the semester, like, hey, I'll be happy to talk about money because my kid wants to talk about something. And so it as the semester inevitably went on, and then of course, year after year, the sort of reputation got out that, when your kid's in this class, you're going to have do work at home with your kids. It became a lot more accepted.
Well, I was just going to say, kind of going back to your, when you kind of ask, are we comfortable talking about money? And I think that's one of the points in kind of their key findings in this is taking time to talk about money counts, but people would do almost anything to change the subject. And kind of, Amber, you mentioned that as well,
Yeah.
just like that feeling of like, I'm comfortable talking about it now. But if you look at these findings, a quarter of Americans, 29%, would rather wait in line at the DMV, sit on jury duty at 27%, miss a flight at 26%, than tell a stranger how much money they have. Nearly a quarter would rather go on a blind date, and 18% would prefer to give a big presentation at work than share their financial statements with friends. And
Yep.
I think for the big thing for me when I read that, and I can totally relate to this, I hate to break it to you, and we're all faking it, right?
Yeah.
We're all broke, and I was broke, and I get it. I get why we're embarrassed because no, I don't want to show you what my financial statement is because you'll know this whole house of cards I have. You'll know that the house I have and the cars I drive and the trips we take, it's all BS. It's all fake. I can't afford any of this. It's literally me putting up this fake facade of what my life is and how great it is. And behind closed doors, I'm like a paycheck away from starting to miss bills and I can't afford anything. And I think as a society, this is like a big reason why I do this podcast is like, we got to break these barriers down and stop act like, especially as we've gotten out of debt. Like for me, like if someone shows me all the stuff they have, I immediately know how you're doing it for the most part. Even people who make $200,000, $300,000 a year, you'd be shocked at the number of people who make that kind of money and are literally broke because it's all fake. And so that's for me. I mean, I understand why people don't want to share that, but that's why I don't talk about it. Like kind of going back to your question, do you bring it up? I know what the reaction is. It's like, do you want to talk about Jesus? No. Like it's the same question, right? It's like nobody wants to talk about that stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've got these debt-free dad hats, and I wear this all the time, and it's time and time again. Go every day. I'll get a compliment. Oh, I love your hat, debt-free dad. That's so cool. That's funny. I'll be like, oh, that's my company, and they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, that's what I do for a living. They're like, well, what do you mean? Well, I help people get out of debt. Oh, that's cool. That's the end of the conversation.
Right.
Right. And so I think, that is, I think you hit the nail on that, or you hit the head on the, what is the saying?
The nail on the head.
The nail on the head. Sorry. But, you do in the sense that people are always like, how are they doing it? How are they able to do all that? They're not. Most people are going into debt to afford the life that they're portraying out there. Right. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of people don't want to talk about money, at least those who are doing those things, is because they don't want to be found out. They don't want to be found. I didn't want to be found out. It was pretty crappy when people found out that I was losing my house to foreclosure and I was broke and didn't have any money. But it took that kind of experience to start to finally admit to myself, like, hey, I really am broke. And when that happened, I started to be okay. I started to be okay saying I was broke. I can't do this anymore. I'm going to start doing some things different once the kind of curtain fell, But I think for a lot of people, that's probably why they try to avoid it. I heard a statistic, too. I I forget what the actual number is, but most people are more willing to share their deepest, darkest secrets than share how much credit card debt that they have. They're willing to share anything else but that. And again, it's because I think we give this image of, we look really good and we look like we've got it figured out, but man, most people are really just struggling.
So this one's, it's funny, but it's not funny. There's no such thing as a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, but when it comes to money, it's much easier for Americans to believe in magic. 71% of Americans have purchased a lottery ticket, and 1 in 4 millennials have turned to fortune tellers for advice, yet only 1/3 of Americans have ever spoken to a financial advisor.
Oh my gosh.
I'm part of the 71%, you guys. I have bought lottery tickets. I haven't actually gone. Yeah, I've seen a psychic too.
Right.
Bingo.
Yeah. But, and again, I don't think this is not a poo-poo of like, hey, you should never play the lottery, or, you should never go to Vegas and have fun gambling. Like, I mean, yeah, if you do that within budget. But I think the eye-opening thing here is like people I think are, and I've talked to people like this, I mean, they think that's their ticket. That's their long-term financial stability plan, is that I'm going to hit something in the lottery, or I'm going to.
Well, the last part of this was like, they haven't spoken to a financial advisor.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
I mean, I got my finances in check and I still play the lottery. So.
Right.
But I did the things, I did the work, right? So.
Yes.
Yeah, that's wild.
So there's one word in there that you mentioned that I'm going to disagree with. Something about magic was the word you used in there, right? Well, there is magic with money. Do a Google search for compound interest. Okay? Study compound interest. Look at every example of compound interest that you can find in your life. It's not just some random mathematical formula. It works. It works every time. And I am living proof of it. That you save, you invest a little bit over time. Eventually, holy cow, this is magic. The amount of money that it produces every year, and the growth every year, and the net worth growth becomes mind-boggling. Now, it's not really magic. It's really compound interest. But it seems like magic, man. It's the most amazing thing. So do it a little bit over time. You can get just as good of results as supposedly winning the lottery with a little bit of patience. So, yeah, it's not magic, but it is magic, I guess is my point. And learn what you can about it and apply it to your life and give it some time, and you'll be able to do some really cool things like we talked about in the last episode.
Yeah, this other statistic, guys, I share this, says financial knowledge is power, and many Americans could benefit. It says just 6 in 10 Americans know their own net worth, 58%, and only 38% know their partners. More people are familiar with Elon Musk's net worth, 28%, than their own family's net worth of 24%. Having clarity around a full financial picture, 40%, and talking to an advisor, 36%, and financial education, 34%, can be critical to achieving success. So those are interesting ones too.
I say BS on the 6 out of 10 that know their net worth. I bet you it's significantly lower.
That's a lot. It's a lot.
I doubt 58% of people could tell you right now what their net worth. Now, I'm one of them. I can tell you right now, almost to the penny. I can pull up a spreadsheet and have it boom. All right. Now, I do mine and my wife's together. It is our net worth. We build wealth together. Everything that we do is together. We're a team. So I couldn't tell you what my personal net worth is versus my wife's personal net worth because it's all intertwined. Mm-hmm. But I can tell you what our net worth is. I can probably tell you what Elon Musk's net worth is as well. I've never talked to an advisor, so some of this makes sense. But 6 out of 10 that know their net worth, I bet you it's not that high. But you should. It should be 10 out of 10. And if you're one of the people who know what your net worth is and you track it, I bet you're winning.
Yeah, and I'd say, like, I'm going to read a little bit before, like, some of these findings, because I think there's some interesting statistics in here. So it's time we had the money talk. Say 66% of Americans who believe open conversations about money are the key to financial freedom. So I just think that's interesting. As we've been talking about this, you look at some of these statistics. So 66% of Americans think that in talking about money and having open conversations is key. But yet then we look at it and like, nobody wants to talk about it. So it's easy to say like, yeah, it's totally. And you see this now, like with high school, right? Or kids, we need to teach our kids about money. We need to teach our kids about money, but then we don't want to talk about money.
Yeah.
And so over 6 in 10 people don't talk about money. Mum's the word with their family at 63%, friends at 75%. So 75% of people don't talk about money with their friends, and even with their spouse. I like this statistics. We see this a lot with the people we work with. 46% don't talk about money at all with their spouse or partner. And we see that being a really big issue, especially when people come to us and say, hey, we really want to help, or we really want to get out of debt or work on our finances, but my partner doesn't. We see this all the time.
My guess is 46% is probably a high number. I bet it's lower than that actually have discussion. Now, if you want to throw in money fights and arguments, yeah, it's probably higher than that.
Yeah.
But it's a key thing. You've got to have conversations with your spouse, your team. I just mentioned that. That's a large part of why my wife and I are where we are today. It's because we do it together. We have conversations and we have very, very few money fights. And really, they're not even fights. It's more of my wife saying, we need this. And I go, and then that's the end of it. And we go buy it. Okay. That's the extent of our fights now.
Right. Well, and I think, again, I think I'd be willing to bet one of the number one reasons why people try to avoid it, or they do avoid it, is because for most people, money is a very sore subject. They're not doing very well. They're probably living paycheck to paycheck. They probably lack savings. They probably have a lot of debt. They're struggling, and so they will probably do more to avoid the conversation and avoid dealing with it altogether than, say, being more proactive. But I will say from a personal standpoint, the conversations that I used to have about money when I was living paycheck to paycheck sucked, but the conversations that I get to have today are a lot more fun because you're on the offensive when you become debt free. You're on the offensive because you actually have money to use to actually build your life and do the things that you want to do. Those conversations and discussions become a lot more fun. But when, everything is always revolving around a crisis or stress or debt, it's hard to be hopeful and want to even talk about that. Again, most people that we talk with, they say, I've just avoided it. I've ignored it, stuck my head in the sand. Those are the types of things a lot of people will say.
And I think too, if you look at the current, our current climate that we're in now, where we have inflation and rising prices, groceries are more expensive, all of these things, when you don't talk about it and you keep it on the back burner, we all recognize that things are more expensive. But when you take control of it, I'm not sitting here like if I would have been in debt like I was years ago, and we were going through inflation and housing prices and all these things were going on like they are, I would be like, how are we going to do this? Just like everybody else is. But when you take control of your finances, you start talking about it, you make a plan. Does inflation hurt? 100%. Do I like paying more for groceries? Of course not. But the decisions we're making are not, I either pay for groceries or pay the electric bill. I'm not having that discussion. I pay more for groceries and we can't go on a nicer vacation. You know what I mean? We're not, it's not affecting us in the way it's affecting us, but not in the way that it would have if we would have been living that life and not wanting to talk about money and just keep pushing it away and acting like the good times are never going to end. And then when they end, it's like, I think that's why there's so much angst right now among people about why they're so stretched, because you could kind of live and still even be in debt when things were good. You could kind of have credit card debt. You could still make your payments. Then all of a sudden things get a little tight and we're like, I can't even buy groceries like I used to anymore because of inflation, which I totally get, but it's not inflation that's the problem. It's what we did before inflation. And that was me too. It's happened to me when the housing crisis hit and we lost a bunch of money. Same thing. It was like, I want to blame the housing crisis. I want to blame all these other people for the problem. The reality is everything I did before the housing crisis when times were good, when I was like, I'm only living once, let's do all the cool things. And then crisis hits and you're like, we have no money. One of the last statistics here, 77% of Americans want to see society take on more emotional and practical money talks. People want meaningful exchanges on ways to save for the future, money mistakes they've made, basic financial literacy, and even emotional aspects of money. A quarter want more discussions about how to negotiate and pay for big expenses. And like, I love this last one because that's what we're here for, right? This is literally what we do.
Yeah. I was just about to say, the Debt Free Dad podcast, because that's what the goal of this show is all about. So yeah, I love that. I love it. All right, guys, if you want to pay off debt, save more money, and take control of your finances and start seeing some amazing results in just the next 30 to 60 days, all you have to do is head over to debtfreedad.com, click on the green button at the top of the page, and we're going to show you how you guys can get started right away.